Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Journey of a Disability Warrior, The Roads We Traveled. Today's guests are Dawn and Dan Lewis, and they join me to share their unique stories in hope of inspiring others who may be on a similar path. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Right, that's good to say.
For having us, Brittany.
That's good to hear.
We'll get it started by having you both tell me a little bit about yourselves. Dan, you can start first. Tell me a little bit about your interest and what you would like people to know about you.
I like to sit around the house, play video games, watch TV.
Dawn, can you tell me just a little bit about yourself? And you can also tell me a little bit about the early years and the journey that you've gone through being Dan's mom. And just if you could just kind of give me that summary of what you would like to share and what Dan would like to share, just kind of to give an overview.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, well, my name is Dawn. I am a mother of 4 adult children, and I have 3 grandchildren. Dan is my youngest son, and he is now 34 years old, but I still remember quite well what it was like in the beginning. Dan was such a good baby. he didn't he didn't cry. He didn't do a lot of stuff. A lot of negative stuff, that is. So we were, just always bringing him in, so to speak. We had 3 other children, so he was always on the hip or right in the middle of what we were doing. But I did notice at an early age that even though he was right in the middle of what we were doing, he was kind of enjoying just being in his own little world. And even with much prompting and encouragement.
Yes, living my own reality.
Yes, you were living in your own reality. I remember in the beginning thinking perhaps that Dan may have had a profound hearing loss, that maybe he couldn't hear us. But then I had friends who had children who were deaf, and that is what it was called, 30 something years ago. I don't know if that's the correct term nowadays or not, but I'd been around children who were deaf. Dan's uncle is deaf, but
Yes, but excuse me, I do think I have enough symptoms to require for auditory processing disorder.
yes, you were later diagnosed with that as well. The one thing that I do remember is that the other children who were deaf did communicate. Sometimes, it may have been what we may have thought of as a negative communication, but they certainly tried to make their needs and desires known. And Dan did not. He didn't. And long story short, he was a quiet little boy. And even though we visited the pediatrician regularly, probably every 3 or 4 months between colds and checkups and whatnot, we were sure that he was probably just taking it all in and wasn't talking because his siblings were doing most of the talking and that kind of stuff. And his siblings were considered to be quite advanced, for their ages and development and stuff. And I didn't really buy into that at the time, but it wasn't until he was 4. And when Dan was 4, we visited a pediatric neurologist in Memphis, and Dan was diagnosed with aphasia, apraxia, and one other A word that I can't think of right now, but basically, it involved a severe speech, language, and communication disorder. So we began working with speech therapists, and Dan was enrolled in a preschool program. At first, it was one through the state where children with disabilities, attended alongside those who didn't have disabilities. And the teacher loved Dan because he just sat in the corner and kept to himself and didn't cause any disturbance at all. Unfortunately, the speech pathologist who was assigned to see him twice a week saw him about once every 2 weeks. Sometimes he didn't get seen for a whole month. And I didn't say or do anything about that for a while because I didn't know I could. Ended the preschool program when I decided to pull him out and enroll him in a private 3 morning a day preschool. That's also when I went back to school to study about speech pathology and special education. But I did make my concerns known to the director of the preschool program, and I wanted it noted that I felt that they had not served Dan. And for what that was worth, I just wanted it noted. Anyway, we wind up realizing that where we lived, he wasn't going to get services. Not the services that he needed. He was an easy kid in a special needs class. I was told that he would receive 20 minutes of one-on-one instruction a day. And I thought, that's crazy. While I was attending Arkansas State University, I came across literature by the DeBard School here in Mississippi. And I thought, wow, that sounds like some place that maybe we could fit in. Maybe they could teach Dan to speak. I don't want to get emotional, but this is the most difficult of everything, Dan, is remembering when you were younger, because things were very hard for us. And long story short, I called Dr. Etolle DeBard, who was retired, and I just didn't know any better. She was a doctor here at USM, and she welcomed my phone call. We spoke for an hour, and she told me she would love to meet Dan. And so we began a journey of looking for work in southern Mississippi. And we got here. Dan attended DeBard during the summer that when we first arrived, and had intensive speech language services, which were all private pay. And we were poor people. we were poor people, but you do what you have to do. Anyway, Dan began public school, and we lived in Petal at the time, and we were, I believe, blessed to have a teacher. He was in a class for other children with speech and language disorders, but the teacher there, Mrs. Felcher, who also worked at DeBard sometimes, excuse me, though I didn't know that then, she recognized right off the bat that Dan needed intensive one-on-one therapy. And that was something that, that school really couldn't provide. And I know that inclusion is such a big thing today, but I was grateful for the opportunity when the school asked if we would consider sending Dan to DeBard. I'm thinking, yeah, that's why we moved here. But anyway, you were there several years, and it was during that time that I first heard you speak. You were about 6 years old, and you could say "mom" because he taught you to be able to say each sound in our alphabet. Dan learned to read way before he could speak, and that was due to the apraxia paralysis, of his speech part.
And also received an autism diagnosis later also.
That's right. That is when you receive the autism diagnosis as well. Were you surprised?
Mhm,
Were you surprised at being diagnosed with autism?
mhm.
Were you
At the moment,
at the moment? But now, when you look back on it, what do you think?
not anymore, really.
Yeah, me either. I wasn't surprised.
How old was
Okay.
Dan when he did receive that autism diagnosis?
How old were you, Dan, when you received the autism diagnosis? Is it 9 or 10?
Somewhere in there.
Somewhere around 9 or 10. He had been at the bar for 3 years.
Yeah.
And
What can you tell me, Dan, about your time at Dubard in your early years? What do you remember
Um,
most?
But the bar school, I know, it's have a good system, but very strict though, but it's just the way the bar school runs, and the bar school, that wouldn't that anyone watch any movies that is above G rated.
when they told you guys to stand in line,
Mm-hmm.
did they mean it?
Mm-hmm.
And that structure, what do you think now? Do you think that structure was good in the long run?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, but yes, in general, I say yes.
I asked about the structure because Dan began public school several years later. He was often surprised at what the students were able to get away with. That was our biggest hurdle, I think, in public school, the stuff that was allowed. And, that if the teacher said not to do something, the kids weren't supposed to do it. And anyhow, but that was good for discussion back then, wasn't it?
I want to go back to how you reacted whenever Dan got the autism diagnosis.
I was not surprised really. It's like I was kind of waiting for it,
Yes, and before that, some people thought it was ADHD, which is even more overly diagnosed, but it's autism.
Yes, he had once been diagnosed with ADHD, and that the autism seemed to fit a little better, didn't it? You think so, Dan?
Mm-hmm.
And that was difficult when we were diagnosed. And again, this has been 25 years ago when he was diagnosed with autism, which I had researched already. I asked his psychiatrist, I said, while trying to find out more about this, is there a particular avenue I should be searching? And she said, Asperger's or high functioning autism. And Dan and I have kind of gotten a kick out of that through the years because, of course, now it's all ASD, autism spectrum disorder. But back then, when you looked at the criteria for each, there were just one or two things that separated them. And I don't know how. I mean, I understand Dan was a smart guy, bright kid, But aside from that, the autism seemed to fit more than the Asperger's, and that may not be a big deal, except at the time, Asperger's basically implied more of just a social, this person may have some difficulties with social things. And
Asperger's is from Austrian German.
yes.
Autism, practice aphasia all came from Greek.
Okay. And wasn't it Dr. Canner with autism, and then and a different doctor for Asperger's. But anyhow, I wasn't surprised.
And what message would you give to parents who are going through this early diagnosis, like just finding out with their children, getting an autism diagnosis or any kind of diagnosis? What advice would you give to that family?
I would just like to encourage any of you who are going through a recent diagnosis to learn all you can about that diagnosis, to be open to what you can learn. But even more importantly, I would encourage you to place a great importance on what you observe every day. What you observe, whether if the child is school age, what do you observe at school? What are they telling you? What do you observe? Professionals are trained, and I have the utmost respect for most of the professionals we've worked with, but not all. That being said, in reality, if you count the number of hours you have spent with your child, and probably not only your child, but others, if you happen to be able to volunteer or have play dates or whatever it may be, you add up your hours. You have a lot of time. You have a lot of knowledge. And sometimes, if you're able to even take the emotion out of it and just look at it factually, you can use what you know to educate the professionals that your child works with. So what about you, Dan? What do you think, parents, what do you think that they should be concerned about maybe when their child first receives a diagnosis? What would have helped you for me to do? It's okay. You can say whatever you want.
Okay. It's the language speak of whatever development is taking longer than usual.
Think of something that a parent can do to help a young child with autism who is not yet able to speak.
Find some specialist
Okay.
that can help.
Dan, I want to ask you another question. What do you think are some common misconceptions about individuals with autism?
Misconceptions is that I know they're all the same, and they're not really. More individuals, even though they have different perspectives than most people begin, when they have differences when it comes to each other, they still look at different things differently also. It's just kind of like people on the autism spectrum usually have different perceptions, but each people on autism spectrum or individuals that may hear or look at something differently than another person with autism. So some people, for example, if some people give a needle in a person's arm, some people have don't feel pain with the needle, while some people react with needles. So it all depends on the person. Yeah.
And Dan, what would you like people to know about what you're capable of?
Capable of talking, um, being dependable, reliable.
And you drive,
Mm-hmm. Well,
and you also work.
but,
What you do for work? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I'm a medical assistant, and I'm a game moderator and a tech assistant.
What do you do as a tech assistant?
Coach caption and medical assistant. Uh, make sure other people try medical doing their things, and game moderator to see if the video game consoles are working. We like to close caption and I haven't read paper in a long time.
Dom, can you tell me about what you feel your role in Dan's life is? And then I'm going to ask Dan that question about what he feels about your role. But I'll let you go ahead and start. So tell me a little bit about your role with where he is now.
I didn't think I was going to tear up on you, Brittany. This is terrible. My role now is to prepare Dan for when I am no longer here. I'm 61 years old. His father is 62. Dan has 3 siblings who love him, and y'all are normal siblings. Sometimes they get along, sometimes they don't. So Dan will always have family, but it makes me very sad to think of the time when me and his father will no longer be here. And we do talk about that a little bit.
Dan, what can you tell me about your mom? What would you like for people to know about how you feel about your mom?
Good. And she likes being around the house.
What would you say that you have learned from Dan over the years?
I've learned not to give up. You don't give up, and you don't compare yourself to anyone else. Each of us is the way we're supposed to be. We each have a part in life. We are each important. We bloom at different times. I have learned, it's okay not to tuck your shirt in. It's okay not to shave every day. It's okay, if maybe we don't always, including myself. I'm not just talking about you, Dan, but have the best table manners. There are it's okay. I mean, you want someone to fit in. Dan knows how to do that when he needs to. And yet at the same time, you deserve to be yourself. You deserve to be yourself. You know, there's so much debate on stimming and, you know, when it's acceptable and when it's not. And at an early age, Dan, I asked him, I would say, you know, it's okay to flick your fingers. It's okay to swing a belt or a rope. You can do that. But do you want that other kid over there to play a game with you? And if you do, maybe he or she just doesn't understand. And I don't think it's weird that you do that. I know why you do it, but they don't. But whether you do or not is your choice. And he made some choices early on as to, you know, in public situations. He's a very much a controlled young man. And but those were his choices, and it's strange as I've gotten to meet more and more people on the spectrum. I have come to value the fact that it is okay if you don't fit in. It is okay. Yeah, we all want to fit in. It doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. I don't fit in everywhere. Sometimes I don't think I fit in anywhere. And you know what? I hope you're not 50 before you realize, hey, that's okay. Just find your people. Find your people that you fit in with.
That brings me to my next question about having your tribe. So the people that know you, love you, support you. Tell me a little bit about both of your tribe of people and why having support from the people that know you and love you is so important.
I think that helped me to get me by, but when we get older, if we lose that someone, sometimes have to get the different guardians to get by whenever we lose these things. When you becoming competent or whatever.
Right now, who would you say that help you be yourself, help you feel good about yourself, whether it's family or friends or people you work with? Who's important to you today?
My mom, my dad.
Now I know there's some other people. Who else? You want to go ahead and spat off some of your friends' names?
Taylor College, Scott Mullins.
Tell me a little bit about the Institute for Disability Studies, because that is where Dan is working. Is that right?
IDS is part of Institute for Disability Studies for people without disabilities to help out in the community. They try to get more people with disabilities for participate and step up, volunteer, employment more. So and try to help more of them to have better health and housing incomes in the future.
USMIDS has been a godsend for us, literally. Dan graduated high school, and for those of you in that situation, it's difficult now, but it was even more difficult, 20 years or 18 years ago. We didn't know where to go or what to do. I wasn't even aware of USMIDS. Some of the things that Dan did after high school, he attended Jones Junior College for a year. He attended William Carey University he took history classes, but I think we both knew that was just a filler. And I decided, to look up again what we had in our area for people in their 20s with disabilities. And I didn't find much. And I wound up going to an autism support group. And this was geared toward parents with younger children. But I just wanted to go because I thought maybe they knew of someone who could help us. And anyway, at the end of the meeting, I introduced myself and, told them I had an older child on the spectrum, and that, I would be very interested in joining a support group or forming one or just being involved in any way I could. And at the time, the person leading that group said, "Have you met Jerry Alliston?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Really? He works at USM, Institute for Disability Studies. You sure you haven't heard of this?" And I said, "No." And apparently when you leave high school and you have a disability, you are usually guided in some after high school services. And if I was, I don't remember. And so I don't want to fault anybody or anything like that. I may have just truly not understood. I may have heard USM and thought college, 4-year university, no, that's not for us. But long story short, we looked up Dr. Alliston and we became involved, and he encouraged Dan to be all he could be. He's pushed Dan, which has been wonderful. I remember we did a person-centered planning meeting, and a whole bunch of people were there. All of Dan's family. Rich Baker was there, Jerry, and some other staff. But they asked Dan what Dan wanted, and he said he wants to do something not in the house and not with his mom. he was ready, just do it on his own. And I remember we all chuckled, but it was great. USMIDS has a wonderful pre-employment training service program for youth with disabilities, usually anywhere from 16 to 22. We have AmeriCorps program, Step Up. We have, oh goodness, peer mentoring, Special Olympics College. And everything is inclusive. Everything is inclusive. And it just works for everyone. And I'm so happy that we found each other.
That's great. I'm going to step back a little bit to high school, and when Dan was starting to transition around the age of like 14, starting to write his transition plan for after high school. Can you take me back to that time and how that planning process went and what that transition was like for Dan?
It's very difficult. I understand the need to be thinking of important things, but at the same time, I felt like it's a life sentence. Okay, you decide which route you're going. When you have someone that's kind of stuck in the middle, who is quite capable of taking regular education classes, but with a disability like aphasia and apraxia, passing, state English tests weren't going to happen. And at that time, you either went one way or the other. And I think it's fair to say we were pioneers for broadening that program. Dan took, I guess, what would be called inclusive special ed classes. He was never in what was back then called a community class. So he was always in an inclusion type class or regular ed classes. And there were times when it got closer to graduation, we were being pressured. Well, he won't be able to graduate with, a regular diploma unless we took certain classes. And I knew that. And part of me, I just thought, we're going to do this. We're going to show them. And then I thought, for what? To show them? And then I thought about the other option. Well, we were actually taking regular ed classes that at first they didn't want to count to go towards an occupational diploma. And if they had not done that, then he would have just earned a certificate. And I fought that. And I said, so are you telling me that the more advanced classes wouldn't cover what was covered in a community class or, another class? And anyhow, that was waived. It was the first time that it was ever done in our school system. And when it's all said and done, Dan did graduate with an occupational diploma, which allowed him to take the regular ed classes that he could take, and then take classes through inclusive community rooms in subjects that he was unable to take. And, and I honestly, part of me didn't care what kind of quote diploma or not diploma. It was about the whole life thing. And then part of me thought, heck no. We've worked way too hard. And I want you to know that I really know that we had the backing of most of Dan's instructors. And parents, you'd be surprised what you can help to make happen that sometimes your instructors can't because of the limitations of where they work and who they work for. With us, I have found that in the background, our biggest cheerleaders have been his teachers.
What advice would you give to parents that are planning their child's transition into adulthood out of high school?
I would encourage you to take advantage of programs that exist now that didn't back then. And some I am quite familiar with, for example, your pre-ETS program, your pre-employment training services programs. And contrary to what you may be told, you have the choice as to who provides those services for your child. They're free services. Any child with a, is it a 504 or an IEP qualifies for these services. You may be told, well, yes, but they have to take them or do them here or there. If you're told that, please email me and I will give you the federal guidelines that say differently. You and your child have a choice. And the only reason I say that is because when Dan was younger, we had one choice. And all the students went there. They put boxes together and made 50 cents an hour and didn't learn anything. I am all for putting boxes together. I really am. If that's what you're going to do. But that's not the only thing available for your child. And I will, part of my job at IDS as a parent support specialist is to help parents find services for their children. And they may not be with us. I'm not, yes, I want you to, at least try what we have here, of course. But, it's not a one size fits all. And I will just try my best. I may not be able to help you, but I will give it all I've got to help your child receive services, free services while they're in high school to better prepare them for when they're out of high school.
So what does being an advocate mean to you, and how have you advocated for Dan over the years?
I've learned so very much. I have learned just how ignorant I really am. I have been self-educated in the early days. I have 90 some odd university hours, but most of my education has come from buying textbooks and reading on my own and listening to webinars and learning from other people. So where I'm getting at with this is political correctness has changed so much in 20 years. I used to say that I really tried to be a voice for people who had no voice. And today that's not a popular thing to say. And you know what? I still say that's true because not everyone can speak. Not everyone can communicate. And every person with a disability should be taught to be, I think, should be taught to be their own self-advocate. My role with that is, if I really know somebody and I've known them for 30 years or 40 years, and there are words that I know they want to say, but at the time, maybe they don't come out, I can say them. I'm not speaking for somebody. You can be an advocate in so many ways. You can, make sure you politely and respectfully listen to everyone, but also demand the same for yourself and for that person you're advocating for. And I've learned a lot, actually, Brittany, through MSPTI. I visit you guys' website quite frequently. I definitely encourage the parents that I work with to go to your website and research the webinars, all the information you have out there. And of course, I know there are other sites as well, but I do find this one to be very parent friendly. And I guess as a parent, that's very important to me.
Tell me a little bit about what that's like for you with being a self-advocate and why that's so important.
Support advocacy and for those with special needs to be part of the community. In the past, I said, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dan Lewis. I am a self-advocate for those with special needs. And try to let them seek help to get help in the community.
Does having a fulfilling life mean to both of you?
Think about uh, when I'm not here, who is going to remember me? And I try to think about that. You know, I have big dreams of helping people with disabilities in our state and areas where we really have such few resources. And sometimes I'll get myself worked up about that. And I beat myself up and think, boy, I wish I were younger. I wish I'd gotten started on this earlier. And then I think, you know, one person at a time. If you are able to positively affect one person, especially someone who really knows you, because they know you when you're not smiling and you're not on camera. And you know, they see your worst just like they do your best. So I hope that the people who are around me the most, you know, remember me well. And when I think of it like that, I think that is fulfilling. What about you, Dan? What does having a fulfilled life mean to you?
Means being happiness and being proud.
Being happy and proud.
Mhm.
What are you proud of?
Proud of self-advocacy.
I'm proud of you.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's a really good place to kind of conclude with just that message of being happy. That's the most important thing, and being proud of yourself and proud of the work that you do. And as long as the people that you touch along the way, that's just a bonus. And y'all both are awesome at what you're doing. And thank y'all so much for coming on today and sharing your stories. And I really know that it will make an impact for those watching that again are going through their journey at different parts of their journey. So thank y'all, and I hope y'all both have a great day.